Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 28th of June, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Thank you, as always, Patrick, for joining us.
Nice to be with you, Brian.
It's good, even though it's raining.
It was sunny this morning when I woke up, but it quickly turned and got back to normal.
Right, so. But this is going to give us the opportunity to ship drinking water to America.
And possibly clouds as well.
Clouds, yeah.
So it could be exciting and really help with the global warming problem. Well,
of course, very important. And we know that the further we ship the water, the cheaper it will be. So this is what trade is about, of course. We better leave that there. We'll also be joined today by Mark Anderson from American Free Press. And Mark, if we've got you, can I gently ask what the weather is doing in the States at the moment?
Here in Michigan, it's quite sunny, a little cool, and yesterday was beautiful. Today is expected to be the same right on the shores of Lake Michigan, and that's my weather report. And no, I'm not the cute weather girl. You'll have to deal with how I look, but there it is.
Okay, well, at least we got some smiles today, because a lot of people here in the UK are saying they need something to cheer them up. Of course, the Brexit vote seemed good on the surface, but cutting into the cake a little deeper, it didn't seem so good. But a lot more on that in a moment. Well, I just wanted to open really with an advert for what we will be talking about later in the news. This case, Janice and Brian Docherty, the mother and father who reported a man for trying to buy their son for sex. They've been harassed and hunted by the British state. They have now disappeared. So what we've got in David Cameron's Conservative Britain in 2016 is people taken off the streets and disappearing into the system. So more of that later in the news. But this is so important, and I wanted to flag it up straight away. Well, if people are disappearing into a gulag, what's important for David Cameron's Conservative government? And of course, one of the key issues is, in fact, intelligent motorways. Now, if you've never come across these before, and Patrick, I think you Americans have got quite a lot to learn. I'm going to bring on screen a picture of an intelligent motorway. So imagine you're driving along the M5 heading for Plymouth. And this is what you actually see, which is about £250,000 worth of intelligent sign, which says there's a 1 penny difference in fuel prices at 3 different service stations. So £250, that's a conservative estimate for getting in one of these intelligent signs. And as you drive further along the motorway, you pass one service station, so now the sign tells you that at the next 2, the price is identical. So there's no difference in the fuel price, but the government spent another £250,000 to tell you. And before you reply, I'll just pop on screen, if I may. Here he is, the right horrible Patrick McLaughlin MP, Secretary of State for Transport, and clearly not very smart.
No, not very smart at all, Brian, because you know what? You didn't show me this story before the show, but there's a free app you can download if you have an iPhone or an Android that will do that for you for free.
Yeah.
You don't need to spend $250,000 per sign to do that. So that is probably one of the worst. That gets the award. That takes the
Okay. And Mark, just to be fair to you, would you like to comment at all? Because does America have this sort of intelligence?
Well, the superhighway, the NAFTA superhighway, is the thing here, and that is a way to truck merchandise from the Pacific Rim through the United States by way of the Mexican Pacific ports. In Texas, it's known as the Trans-Texas Corridor. That's the portion of the new NAFTA superhighway network. And it is supposed to be a highly intelligent, multimodal effort and network of super wide highways. It's being built in piecemeal, and they're making it look like it's a bunch of separate projects, when in fact it's largely one grand project. So they have a similar thing here. I don't see that kind of signage or that kind of waste of money and ridiculous application of technology that you're talking about, but they do have the notion of a smart highway here in place in some areas, it's on blueprints in other areas, and that's so they can continue the free trade system via the superhighway system.
And presumably that will also include a toll system, because we're pretty confident that's what's coming in UK.
Yes, it is complete toll. That truth be told is the play on words that critics use, but it's completely based on tolls, and it vastly increases the cost of transportation. And I myself have dealt with it, where you drive through a toll loop and suddenly you get a bill in the mail and you have no idea when you entered the toll road, and you have no clear idea when you left the toll road, and yet you get a bill in the mail and they charge interest and penalties if you don't pay it.
Okay, well, that's a little bit of a glimpse into the future, 1984. But let's come back to Brexit in UK and some astonishing reports. I mentioned this on the Ukraine, with the Ukraine last night, and I thought I'd bring it up on screen today because this is an outrageous story in the Plymouth newspaper. Suicidal trapeze teacher from Plymouth says that Brexit will ruin her career. I won't repeat some of the comments that have been tweeted back to me, but one viewer did suggest if you're feeling a bit poorly like that, probably the trapeze is not the best place to be. But the whole point about this story is it's based on nothing. The woman is in a difficult personal circumstance, not because of Brexit, but because of career choices that she made. And yet this is being presented to us at the moment as if, oh my goodness, it's one of the results of Brexit. So there we are. If you're involved in circus maybe or trapeze, you certainly don't want Brexit. Well, if we go to the other extreme, we've got this, and the Independent here reporting on a lawyer who says that MPs must still vote in order for Britain to leave the EU. A new bill to repeal the 1972 European Communities Act that took Britain into the EU must be passed by Parliament. It says under our constitution, the constitutional lawyer says sovereignty rests with what we call the Queen in Parliament. Now, I've put underneath, this does not mean that Parliament is sovereign, because the Queen represents the people in Parliament since she's taken the coronation oath. And the significance of that comment is this, because here is the BBC spewing out the lies from David Cameron. There's a good cause for new UK sovereignty law. This is what the horrible man had to say. If it's necessary to do that again in more detail to make it even clearer to people that our Parliament is sovereign, I think there's a good case for it, so we'll look very carefully at it. Well, this is the lie. David Cameron trying to say that Parliament is sovereign. Well, of course, Parliament is not sovereign. If it were, we'd already be in a dictatorship. And I know that last statement's an oxymoron, but basically, David Cameron, backed by the BBC, utterly lying and trying to say that Parliament has ultimate control. It's the people that's sovereign. So one more, and I will hand over to our guest, really. But this was a very interesting email sent through. Try and read it very quickly. It says, "Hi, Brian, my child goes to school. Wherever he reports, his form tutor has been leading discussions with, we will now end up at war. Brexit will destroy your futures, and if your parents have voted, you need to get them to understand how damaging this is to you as a young adult." The boy's pretty clued up, though, and he said it might change the fact that 75% of his class had no prospects of a career. But the point that the person makes who sent this to me is that this was essentially a political agenda being carried out in the school. Now, I know that this is a hot topic in the States, Pat. We've got a whole new agenda in American schools, Common Cause. And what are we doing? We are, it's propaganda.
It is, and it's politicizing something that has no business to be politicized in a classroom. Yet, time and time again, this is what we see. Whether it's sustainable Agenda 21 type stuff baked into curriculums by teachers, not even in the curriculum, but they decide to bake it in, and the advancing of certain ultra liberal left wing items, social items and it's really trying to shape the minds of the children in a very politicized, a very cunning way.
And we can say that this isn't an agenda just drifted in by the old school teacher. This is agenda that's come straight down from state government.
But what they're doing, this is interesting. Just flash that email back very quickly. The significance of this, you cannot understate, Brian. This is turning children against parents.
Yeah.
This is designed to split families, to turn generation against generation. This is the culture wars, okay? And this is more dangerous than class warfare, pitting race against race. These are all bad things. But what you're seeing here, what this teacher is enacting here, is hugely damaging. This is the type of thing that can cause great strife socially in a country
and inside families.
And this is done by design. This is done by design. And I mean, if I was in charge of that school, that teacher would be fired straight away.
Yeah.
But yet, this is probably more prevalent around the country than anyone would care to admit.
I'm confident that is the case because the amount of correspondence we receive on it. Well, Mark, your slide that you were keen to get up here is, of course, the Truth Hound, which is where you are blogging. But a fascinating title: Congress quietly considers creation of truth ministry. This seems to fit in quite nicely. What's this all about?
Well, while we're all ranting and raving, I write here about more civilian gun control in the wake of the very mysterious Orlando event. The U.S. Congress has been quietly brewing a bill that would apparently create an official Ministry of Truth in the federal government, as I write. And this is H.R. 5181. It's called the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act of 2016. And one of the congressmen, Adam Kinzinger, a Republican from Illinois, he, of course, is turning his verbal guns toward Russia and saying, quote, as Russia continues to spew its disinformation and false narratives, they undermine the United States and its interests in places like Ukraine. But Mr. Kinzinger is either being very deceptive or is blissfully unaware of Victoria Nuland, the State Department figure who worked to get that Yatsenyuk guy and Poroshenko in there, and the United States State Department having been active in overthrowing Yanukovych's regime in Ukraine, and that the United States was fully behind the coup in Ukraine in early 2014. And so the U.S. once again is playing this shining city on the hill image where propaganda could only come from Russia and outside the United States. The U.S. is this citadel of truth. And if we only counter the foreign propaganda through this bill, then everything will be right with the great city on the hill, the United States, and the free world. And this is the grand deception going on. The U.S. has been a birthplace, a incubator for propaganda for generations. It goes back to the United States Information Agency, which Edward R. Murrow ended up heading after his CBS career, the famed journalist. And now we have all these decades of Operation Mockingbird, when the U.S. CIA knowingly and willfully infiltrated news organizations throughout the U.S., particularly coming out of World War II, coming out of World War II mostly, because the CIA was the OSS during World War II. At any rate, this bill is clamping down on Russian propaganda, acting to counter that. And in it, this congressman takes a very dim view of Russia, and they're basically kind of trying to give us a retread, a revisit of the good old days of the U.S. propaganda war with Russia during the days of the Cold War, is what I mean. So you have here a bill that will then create a U.S. agency to counter foreign Russia propaganda, to kind of resuscitate the Cold War info wars between the two nations. And it involves the Broadcast Board of Governors, which is a rather obscure body within the U.S. government. And that is a federal body that oversees federally controlled and federally funded media networks like the Voice of America. And Secretary of State John Kerry, a member of the Skull and Bones fraternity, is a member of the Broadcast Board of Governors. So you have the U.S. government getting more ensconced in controlling news in order to control Russian propaganda, when in fact the U.S. needs to look in the mirror in terms of just where most of the propaganda is coming from.
Well, thank you for that analysis, and it's becoming increasingly obvious, I think, certainly if we look at propaganda from the British BBC, that the quality of the propaganda that we're pushing out is so pathetic that the general public are beginning to see through it quite easily. I think Putin must be laughing. Patrick?
Yeah, Mark's brought up a lot of interesting points there. I just want to add to, here's the reality. The reality is that since World War II, two countries have had a monopoly on global English language media, and that includes news and commentary and analysis. That's the United States and Great Britain. Okay, and that monopoly has been broken in recent years. And what this bill that Mark is alluding to here is really targeting mainly RT. And RT globally has gathered a huge audience. And the reason is because they're, on the whole, doing a much better job at reporting international news events and offering commentary and analysis. Now, if they think they're going to build a new arm of the government's media complex that's going to counter the Russian propaganda, all that's going to do is produce its own propaganda. It's already doing that. It's doing that through CNN, through Fox, through the Voice of America, through Radio Free Europe, and whatever else is under the government's umbrella there, and it's ridiculous. This is why people are tuning out. The other problem is they don't realize, and few people have bothered to pay attention, RT is not only a state-funded media outlet, they're commercial. They're part public, part private, and their commercial earnings are going up and up and up, and it won't be long till that is a sustainable commercial project, okay, if it's not already. And this is something that's totally overlooked, and this is the problem with generally journalism, is people don't look into this stuff. They run TV ads. They have huge income on media stream online. So they're very successful. So if it's a battle for eyeballs, listen, I'll end with this. I would be watching CNN and the BBC and Fox if they were doing real reporting. If they were doing real analysis, I would be glued to those channels. But they're not. And this is why me and everybody else are not looking at them, because they are not producing what people want. And RT is, and they're upset about that. And they're kicking and screaming, throwing their toys out of the pram right now.
Okay.
So sorry.
Right, well, Mark, take us on. You've got some comment here on Brexit.
Well, I appreciate what Patrick just said, and I concur. RT would be a central target for the reasons he stated. Yes, of course, with Brexit, I'm continuing to follow those I follow often, and that's the global network here that works under the umbrella of the World Affairs Council of America, or WACA. And there are some 60 outlets in the U.S. that could be said to be branches of Bilderberg. People have to understand that Bilderberg and the Trilateral Commission are a network, and they have feelers. And these 60 outlets, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, the Dallas World Affairs Council, the San Antonio World Affairs Council, 60 of them, regional and city-based throughout the U.S., spew the CFR Bilderberg Trilateral line on a daily basis, and they have money to burn. And therefore, of course, they're all aflutter about Brexit. And they try to cover all the bases. They come out largely against it, of course. But what I'm pointing out with this article through the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, this is written by a Mr. Richard Longworth, I think his name is. He's a former Chicago Tribune journalist. And there's a lot of former and current journalists in this whole affair that, just like at Bilderberg, they associate with these people. They participate with this forced integration on a transnational basis, but they don't report on it. They're absolutely dropping the ball with the rules of journalism. As Patrick alluded to, the regular media is already propagandistic, and they have no credibility. And this just adds fuel to that fire. But anyway, what this guy is saying about Brexit is interesting in the sense that here's what he put. The biggest gap is historical. Britain was almost the only EU member to be neither defeated nor occupied during World War II. Thus, it misses the crucial historical and emotional thrust behind the European project, which is to keep another world war from happening. The EU methods are economic, but its purpose is to prevent another Hitler.
So I have to chuckle at that point.
But this, since Bilderberg and these other globalists helped form the European Union, they're saying that anybody that's nationalistic in their views is potentially, populist, jingoist, chauvinist, xenophobic, and they may just sprout into being another Hitler. And supposedly, this is why they organized after the war, they organized Europe the way they did and created the European Economic Community and that whole evolution up to the European Union. And now if Britain wants to pull out, ostensibly, they're all aflutter. But the fact is that World War I and the conditions coming out of World War I that were imposed on Germany, carried out by these very same globalists through the Woodrow Wilson administration, through the foundation of the Federal Reserve System, through Edward Mandell House, Philip Drew. He wrote the novel Philip Drew. He was that obscure character who was the controller or handler for Woodrow Wilson. A lot of us remember Colonel House. And these same globalists that led to Bilderberg are the ones that fostered World War II by the settlement of World War I. And now they're telling us that the European Union they helped form is to help prevent war. It was born in the bowels of war in terms of the ultimate taproot of how all this came about. So this goes a little deeper than maybe we're used to seeing. This is just how warped these transnationalists are, these integrationists, in always acting like they're the peacenik. And if we would only follow them, we'll have no more Hitlers, we'll have eternal peace. But in fact, all the Western nations, particularly the United States, have been at war now for years on end. It's becoming decades long. Wars don't even begin and end anymore. They just go on constantly.
Yeah.
So it just shows how much more farcical this all is from the pens of these former journalists who are now with these World Affairs Councils.
Well, Mark, it also shows the job that we've got to do because, of course, all of those historical facts about where the European Union originated, going back to the latter days of World War II and the Red House meeting, the involvement of the OSS and Donovan, all of that information is available. It's been well researched by many people, but it hasn't been brought in front of the wider public in an easily digestible form. And I think that's something we could all help work on. If we just move on, though, and I think Mike has prepared a clip here, an audio clip, which is the BBC propagandizing. This is really quite incredible. We're just here, it's only a few seconds, but we thought it was so bad we needed to play it out. We can move on.
In the EU referendum, the borough of Basingstoke-and-Deane voted to leave. Its results were reflective of the national picture, with 52% wanting out and 48% wanting to stay in. So, was immigration a factor in how people voted here? At a local pub, a man tells me he's pleased with the outcome because of the rising numbers of foreigners in the town. It's not long before he begins uttering racial slurs towards me, including a word that Asian people find especially offensive.
I think all the immigrants, they should leave the country, you know what I mean?
So are you talking about Eastern Europeans?
Yeah, like, not saying like Pakistan, I'm saying like all of them, do you know what I mean?
Did you just say Pakis?
No, I don't mean sorry, love.
That's offensive.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, I didn't mean to come across, but it's all them. Like, they're not foreigners. We all bleed the same. We've got the same heart. But it's different coloured skins. You know what I mean?
So do you not like Asians either?
No, I do like Asians. I'm not.
You just use the word
yeah,
Paki.
I know I use Paki, but I'd come out of more offensive. Well, you know what I mean? But I'm not like that. I'm not racist at all, any shape or way.
But it's not clear whether this type of discourse is an occurrence of the referendum debate. I'm told by the lady behind the bar, this sort of talk, the P word, is nothing new in this pub. I'm rather shocked because that man just called me the P word.
A lot of people do use that word quite freely. You'll be surprised because without meaning to sound rude, your skin colour's different. Naive people will look at you and think you're not English, and that's the way people are around here.
Well, I've got to say, when I heard that clip, it sounded to me entrapment journalism at best, or was the whole thing set up? Outrageous, because there was no penetrating reporting there. This was simply propaganda being compiled. We've got quite a lot of material to go, so I'll just give you a quick one on that.
No, so what they did is they packaged it as a post-Brexit vote segment, but then they quickly spun it into this community's who voted leave is a racist community, and so it wasn't it didn't perform its function that it was sold as, and they used it to basically further this agenda that anyone who votes leave, well, they must be racist.
Right. And this, of course, is the same BBC. Let's give a classic example that when we approached the BBC to help report a story where an Asian gentleman had reported paedophiles, the BBC was not prepared to get involved, and then, having ignored all of the evidence, simply said, well, we've spoken to the school concerned, Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, and they've told us there's nothing in the story. So show a bit of passion here. The BBC is becoming outrageous.
Is it possible to parody yourself? But they just did it.
They just did, yeah.
Incredible.
So despicable stuff. Now, you've got quite a few slides here, Patrick, which have caught your attention. Take us through some of these. This one's particularly interesting, I think.
Well, in the wake of the Brexit vote last week, so this is a former BBC World Affairs correspondent, and I believe she's in the Ukraine. And her name is Natalia Antilava, and she's just tweeted in a hat tip to Mark Sloboda for sending me this tweet. So, Londoners, are you going to take to the streets and protest, or what? If you are that pissed off, maybe time for a British Spring, a Maidan. So this is a Ukrainian former BBC anchor, correspondent, basically advocating for a Maidan, like in what happened in Kiev in February 2014. So there should be a British Spring, right? So, but someone failed to notify her that we're in summer now. You're going to have to wait 8 months.
I wonder whether she was trained by BBC Media Action that specialises in subversion. Don't know.
Yeah. So again, this is the narrative that the country's angry, that the masses or the working class voted to leave the EU, and so the bourgeois class is upset and calling for a color revolution in Britain. Yeah. So, and cue George Soros. So this leads on to this. So today, a huge rally in Trafalgar Square, Brian, and it's being marketed. This is Time Out magazine, really hitting the young voters. A pro-solidarity, so EU solidarity rally. Tens of thousands of people, we're told, are due to show up this afternoon in Trafalgar Square in solidarity with the EU. The language here is amazing.
It's color revolution language, actually.
It is pro-solidarity. Yeah. So, in other words, they're insinuating that somehow the country has fallen under a dictatorship, which is actually technically true, as we said in our previous. But what they're doing instead, they're rebelling. Time Out is trying to get the youth to rebel against the vote, is essentially what they're doing. So, again, it's characterizing this thing that voting's bad, referendums are bad. Yeah. And the people cannot be trusted with important decisions. That is the most fascist concept being pushed there by mainstream media, that ordinary people, especially working class people, are not qualified or not worthy to make any important decisions about their own lives and about their own country.
Yeah, we need leaders to tell us what to think.
Yeah, and charities and
non-government organisations.
Not NGOs, yes.
And of course, if we discussing leaders, we better bring this gentleman on screen because clearly he is a leader.
Operation Fear goes into overdrive here. This is George Osborne. The country is going to be poorer because of Brexit, says George Osborne. How exactly he came to his sums on this is beyond me. And if you look at any time a country's gone independent, Brian, or gone on their own, huge economic success stories, it's hard to find one that isn't a success.
And that makes sense because the country focuses back in on itself. The priorities are what that particular country's priorities are. You're not distracted by European infighting and politics. And
if you look at the country like a company, you shave off a whole layer of bureaucracy. That cuts costs straight away. It increases efficiency. You only have to look to the best performing economy in Europe right now, Brian. It's which country? In Europe. Not the EU, in Europe, it's Norway, one of the best performing economies in the country, and they're not part of the EU.
Yeah.
But yet they have access to the EU market, just like Britain will maintain its access to the EU market. So,
of course.
But not say Britain's going to leave. We don't know if that's actually going to happen yet. But if they do, Norway has an access agreement, that Britain will be able to negotiate a much stronger agreement because Europe sells more products to Britain
Of course.
than Norway does.
Yeah,
So
they
it's-
just forgot to tell us that.
Yes.
If we can just pop George Osborne back on screen, I just wanted to say I'm a little bit worried about him because he's looking a little bit drawn and peaky. I don't know whether he's been drinking too much Coke. And the other thing I noticed was that Russia Today reporting UN human rights chief urges Britain to act over post-Brexit xenophobic attacks. I'm not sure where all these xenophobic attacks are, but apparently the UN has said we've got to act.
They must be in that pub in Basingstoke.
Bring in Branson.
Here we are, the gremlin himself, Richard Branson, the billionaire eon of all things, Virgin, is calling, demanding, in fact, the government hold a second referendum to prevent the irreversible damage to the country. So says the Lord of Necker Island,
Right.
Richard Branson. He
Yep.
knows what's best, and people who voted, well, that's a meaningless gesture by the public who voted. That means everybody who came out to vote. It really discredits the whole process of even having a referendum in that way. But what does Richard Branson know? Apparently,
Well, who is he?
everything.
I always ask this question. Just who is he? So, okay, he's an entrepreneur and he's got an airline and a few other toys, but who is he? What are his values? Do we really care? No.
But we don't know much about what his values are.
No.
We know he's rich. We know he was on Piers Morgan this morning, I think,
Oh,
calling
well.
for a second referendum on ITV on the sofa with Piers, who landed a job, so I'm happy that he's in gainful employment.
Okay. Now, Mark, I know you're there. Just allow me to get through two more with Patrick, and we'll bring you in for some comment. I've got the A register here, ballot stuffing.
So this is the lot's been made in the media about this petition by William Oliver Healy, which you covered previously, with all these millions of signatures. Well, this is the register, one of the IT news go-to sources here, botnet-powered ballot stuffing expected in second referendum petition. And this came out quite early, so this is a few days old, actually. And there are quite a few number of, many thousands, in fact, tens of thousands, maybe more than 100 or hundreds of thousands of fake signatures run by a bot using array servers globally.
I think this article mentions 77,000 actually, but
Yeah, and I think the number grew after that.
Yeah.
So this is an early report, but it's funny, Vatican City only has a population of 800, yet somehow there were 30-something. The Guardian reported 39,000 signatures from Vatican City.
yeah, but a lot of the children presumably underage.
There's only room for 800, apparently. So again, this should show you that someone is engaged in dirty tricks, I guess, or this is just done for what reason, I have no idea, but
They don't like it is the reason, isn't it? They do not
know.
like the result. This one I found absolutely fascinating because it gives us a totally different picture on what might be going on.
so this is a very typical tweet. This is by Jamie. I don't really know. I think Jamie Papel, but she's got some very interesting tweets actually on her front page. I like a lot of them. But she says, "I haven't come across a single young person supporting Brexit today. Our future should have been our decision, not in our name." I love this hashtag, "not in our name." This was first used as an anti-war hashtag, and it's funny how it's been appropriated for by the Remain campaign, "not in our name." So again, it's like a kind of war talk, or it's protesting, but protesting for the establishment in a way. It's an interesting way that it's been inverted.
And we are seeing the manipulation, the use of social media in order to get this political agenda across. Mark, we've covered quite a bit there, but comment where you like.
I was going to add, and you guys picked up on it, and RT had it right after the vote, that there were supposedly 2 million plus signatures on a mysterious petition saying, let's reverse Brexit, let's exit Brexit, and actually remain and override the vote and just nullify the whole thing. You guys touched on it, so I'm just emphasizing it. But what's particularly interesting is that Euronews reported on Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, and I looked at Article 50 myself. Not only does it take a minimum of 2 years to actually exit the EU, every single law and regulation that applies to Britain, cooked up in Brussels by the EU, still applies to Britain on June 24th, June 25th, and well into the future. Britain is still in the EU, operating under every EU law, every EU stricture, every EU regulation. Nothing has changed. And this has to be stressed.
Okay, we'll just move on to the next slide.
Absolutely.
So that person saying, where are all the, the young people's voice hasn't been heard? Well, according to the BBC News, Brian, in this article, which I was surprised how balanced this article is. I think that even the BBC's pennies dropped a little bit in terms of the public mood, but 8 reasons the Leave vote won the UK's referendum in the EU. And the reason is because from the 18, according to the stats, 18 to 32-year-olds, 64% stayed at home. So 64% of the youth, who this person, Jamie, who was tweeting earlier, saying, oh, our voices haven't been heard, that's because the old fuddy-duddies outperformed the millennials when it comes to the crunch and getting your butt out to the poll to vote. The fuddy-duddies have it.
Yeah.
And the youth are complaining on Twitter, but yet they're not bothering to get out and actually get to vote. So
because the same media that's pumping this out has actually dumbed them down so that they're asleep or playing video games or whatever else they do.
So this is interesting. So and on the back of that, so this is the fallout here. David Cameron faces Brexit talks with EU leaders, and there was fear mongering that he wouldn't be allowed to the crisis meeting in Brussels, but I think he's there in Brussels. That wasn't true. 150 MPs expected to vote against Jeremy Corbyn as the Labour crisis deepens. And I commented there, I was just amazed to see Jeremy Corbyn wearing a starched white collar. I've never seen that before. I thought it was either he's going to a funeral or something. Or...
This actually, we can comment a bit further on that one. Sorry, I didn't get in there quick enough, but we're intrigued with this photograph. Luckily, there was a reporter on the scene who was able to pick up a little bit of the dialogue. David Cameron was particularly unhappy there. Mummy, this nasty man is touching me. And we've had to highlight that on screen because that really is the most disgusting hand stroke, I think is what it's called.
I don't know what to say.
It's got something a bit, hasn't it? Something a bit distasteful about it. Mark, you're laughing in the background. We're being quite serious here because we're outraged by this going on so blatantly in front of the camera. What's your thoughts?
Well, these sort of unseemly activities are not uncommon. We see Masonic handshakes oftentimes among these leaders and other strange gestures. And like Patrick said, you really don't know what to say about it. And very quickly, did my last comment prior to this one come through okay?
Yes, it did. I just missed the queuing a little bit, which is why I didn't respond directly before we moved on, but it did.
That's okay. I just want to make sure. Yeah, I think it's just part and parcel of the strange rituals and strange, esoteric behavior that these people have due to their background associations that are often, very mysterious, Masonic and otherwise. But I guess we need not elaborate on that right now, but it's always something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, here we are, The Guardian. So we're now into the nasty stuff.
Yes, this is where the rubber meets the road, as they say. So, we talked to Mike and I, and you as well. We talked about the blood on the streets this summer and how the culture wars, how it's getting nasty. And so this hit the wires really fast, Brian. I was amazed at how much immediate traction, but I only saw a few major outlets reporting this. One was the LA Times, The Guardian, and RT, and a couple of others. The RT was piggybacking off, I think, the LA Times report. But so multiple people stabbed at Sacramento white nationalist rally. Now, and I went and checked this out because I had to file a report on this story. So I did a little research, and it was a so-called white supremacist group on the steps of the Sacramento city building having a rally, and the anti-fascist group appears, and they have it out, hitting each other with sticks, and apparently we're told that 6 people got stabbed.
Right.
Okay, now, and I looked a little closer, and I watched the videos. the police were not policing. I don't even know if they were police. They seemed to be actors or something. They didn't engage at all. There's no mention of any arrests being made. Now imagine 6 people getting stabbed right in broad daylight at 12 noon, and lots of police surrounding there, just taking, the police were taking photos and video, were not doing anything. And my experience with police in America is that if as soon as you pull a knife out, it's over.
Well, it's going to be a taser, a minimum,
it's
isn't it?
That's
be a
what
taser,
tasers
are for.
And you'll be tie-wrapped, and you'll be down on the ground within 5 seconds. And this thing smacked of a staged provocation where I believe both sides are being directed. And the timing of this right before the Republican National Convention, and the so-called anti-fee, or Antifa, or whatever the group was, the anti-fascist group, the spokesperson said, we need an organized, militant, multi-state swarming operation to stop these fascists and Nazis. And actually, it wasn't a Nazi group having a rally. They're quite a moderate, in terms of the hate white supremacist scale, quite a moderate thing. So, and of course, the Southern Poverty Law Center was there, on standby to provide information about this so-called hate group. And it's completely staged. The fact is, every single activist group, every single movement in America from the 1950s, from civil rights to environmental to white nationalists to militia, every single one has been infiltrated. Every single major and mid-major group in the U.S.
That's the way you do it.
Has been infiltrated by the FBI. There's hundreds of books, articles, and papers written on this very subject. And the Guardian didn't ask any questions about that. They weren't interested in the fact that you're looking at something.
It was the Guardian that reported the Southern Poverty Law Center around Joe Cox, wasn't it? It was the Guardian that first broke that. I think I'm correct.
The Sacramento was totally. This was the most staged, theatrical performance I've ever seen.
Mark, we'll just bring you in here for some quick comment on this one, because I'm not on the time at the moment, but are you familiar with this particular incident?
I heard about it, but what Patrick's saying is spot on. These things are a form of agitation to bring about state changes in terms of the police state. The action is in the reaction, whether it's small or large scale terrorist acts, whether it's guns or knives. The reaction by law enforcement, the reaction by the Southern Poverty Law Center and the B'nai B'rith and Anti-Defamation League, it's all in the reaction. It's all to paint the average conservative male, white male, nationalistic, populist people, to paint them all with one broad brush as little Hitlers. We're out to destroy the country, when in fact the forced transnationalism, the forced integration of the world, the modernists, the ones that push this modernity, they're the extremists. Morris Dees of the Southern Poverty Law Center, he is the extremist. Abraham Foxman, he is the extremist. The extremists are the ones going around calling the rest of us extremists. And the action is in the reaction. They just use this to create more of a police state. And these things could very well be staged. It looked very phony the way Patrick described.
Yeah.
And not only that, the group, the so-called white nationalist group, this event was a huge boon for membership. So by staging this event, they've actually pumped up the so-called right-wing extremist group. So it's counterintuitive from a layman's point of view. But what it is, the establishment builds up both the left and the right, and to a point where they will then have a real social conflict that they can actually build up over time. Yeah. And then the police state comes in with the big hammer at the end. This is time and time again. We see the same cycle, decade after decade, over and over. And we're in the midst of we're on the crest.
It's now happening in our countries instead of seeing it used on somebody else's.
And it's happening in Britain. It's happening in Britain too, and throughout Europe. They're really pumping up these right-wing extremist groups to an unnatural level, and it's creating a reaction. And then the police state comes in to basically impose law and order out of chaos.
Order out of chaos. Well, while we're talking those very serious subjects, this is the other subject going on in the background, and I'm going to say people being used on a phenomenal scale here. So the Telegraph going big on Pakistani clerics declare transgender marriage is legal in Islam. And I'm going to ask a key question. What version of Islam are they talking about? Are they talking about the Saudi, Qatar, big money Islam? Because we know that with the Saudi mosques come new imams and a completely new version of Islam. But at the end of the day, these people are being used in order to cause further confusion in society. I'll add a bit more in just a second. Let's switch to local Plymouth MP Oliver Colville. We've been following this man for some time because he's very big on hedgehogs, but he kindly sent me a round-robin email. He said last Thursday, Britain had the opportunity to vote on the future relationship with the European Union. While I am disappointed with the outcome, I fully accept the result. People of Plymouth and the United Kingdom have spoken. They want to leave. He wants to offer his sincere thanks. It goes on, so stay with me. It's now time for our city and our country to come together, heal and unite, good words, in the way that the British do. That means that we as MPs need to listen to the concerns of our constituents and understand why they felt that the only option was to leave the EU. Well, we just bring in the fact that Mr. Colville, they wanted to get out of the EU because they're fed up with politics, which includes MPs who think that hedgehogs are more important than jobs or the state of the country. And of course, local Plymouth Herald picked up here that Mr. Colville appeared to be a little bit naughty with his expenses. So people just getting a bit miffed. But here we go, down the bottom. It says he's interested in an increase in defence spending in order to safeguard the future of our armed forces. That's why they're being cut, of course. A stronger economy for all and a fairer society with the opportunity for those who love each other to marry regardless of their sexuality. So Islam's apparently bringing some interesting subjects in. And this was the Daily Mail. And the comment, in case you can't read it, because it'll be a little bit small on screen, that we put was, never mind the kiss. This is a policeman in partial uniform, because, of course, he doesn't have his hat on. So he's breaking the uniform regulations. He's breaking down discipline. And is this the sort of man that then likes to go into police stations strip searching people? So there's some very mucky stuff being pushed forward. But Mr. Colville goes on and he praises David Cameron. His strength, compassion, determination helped the Conservative Party to achieve a majority government for the first time in 20 years. When he steps down later on in the year, I hope that David Cameron will be remembered as a radical, reforming Prime Minister who strengthened the British economy, improved our schools, and drove up standards in our public services. What is this MP on? He's clearly taking something that's causing a problem. And the inset there is just a little banner. It says, read carefully, we don't give a flying fig for Britain or the British. And David Cameron there with his chum, I think they're called in Eton, chums. That's his chum, Boris. Mark, I'm going to say that it seems that many British MPs, I don't know whether it's magic mushrooms or it's pollen, genetically modified pollen, but they're clearly not thinking straight anymore.
Yeah, there's such servility there, such servility to the ruling class and to the establishment, and such a lack of regard for the common man, as you guys have been outlining through the way they've been commenting on Brexit, through the way they try to delegitimize the whole idea of the people making decisions. And all of that is just part and parcel of paying homage and having total servility and genuflection before the PM, towel flicking their way up the good old boy network, as they say. And it's really distasteful and really getting old. We really need some real leaders. We need some people cut from a different cloth.
I think I can only agree with that comment. Well, we're going to end on the real state of the nation in UK at least, and we'll come back to the Docherty family. Now, we have in dispatches, we have audio tapes talking about what has actually happened to this family. A man approached them, offered to buy their son, to pay £25,000 for the ability to be able to abuse their son. From the moment this couple reported those facts to the police, they've been harassed, hunted, they've had to leave their house, they've had all of their children taken by the state, and they have now disappeared. We have their testimony. We're going to make sure the rest of that interview by David Scott of Northern Exposure becomes available. We're going to encourage people to listen to it. But where is this couple? We think they're currently held somewhere by the state in Southern Ireland. That's where they'd gone for sanctuary. But as we've labelled there, this is a family that's now effectively become like the South American disappeared. People get too close to the state and they literally disappear into the police and psychiatric gulag. And if that case is not enough, then I'm really sorry to have to say that child abuse survivor and whistleblower Melanie Shaw is now back in prison. We believe that she's in HM prison, Foston Hall. How has she got there? Because Melanie became increasingly distraught at the fact that her son, taken away by the British state, was, according to Melanie, being abused in care. So a child abuse survivor, brave enough to blow the whistle, then has her own child taken by the British state until she's under such psychological pressure that she posted something on the internet, and the next minute she's back in prison. I have to say that watching Britain in 2016, if we want to know how to get the lid off the quality of the people we got in Westminster, stick with the subject of the children, because child abuse and the blackmail that follows it is the key weapon. But I'm also just going to quickly remind people that, of course, Theresa May is ultimately responsible for this. Theresa May, British Home Secretary. This lady is running the biggest state surveillance system. This makes East Germany look like a kindergarten. Theresa May, very, very dangerous lady. I won't read this because we're a bit short of time, but somebody pointed out that when Ian Crane was stopped at Exeter Airport, this was all to do with the Investigatory Powers Act. And if we bring her in, she is in the biggest network we've ever seen. Very dangerous woman, spying on every aspect of the general public with that prison and psychiatric gulag. And yet, how's she being presented? Well, she's sort of middle Britain. She's squeaky clean. She dresses properly, so she must be okay.
I think that's the people change in these positions, heads of departments and agencies and cabinet positions. People change. Even from party to party. Yeah. But the agenda, Brian, has never stopped.
It's never stopped. No.
Through Thatcher, Major, through Blair, through Brown, through Cameron, and now whatever the next leadership, the agenda never changed.
No, because the agenda comes from the powerful people behind the scenes controlling them. And if you want to control a politician, as Tim Fortescue, whip to the Conservative Party in 1973, says on BBC recorded video interview, well, we fixed the problems between the MPs and the little boys because the MPs would do as they're told. Mark, last brief comment from you, and we must move to close.
I appreciate that. Well, this just proves that the threat to the people, unfortunately, is their own government. These governments say that external terrorists are the threat, but what terrorists can steal children like this? What terrorists can break up families and destroy families like this? What terrorists from ISIS or elsewhere can erect cameras all around Britain? The real terrorist threat comes from the state itself, when the state is beholden to powerful interests behind the scenes, and therefore it just delegitimizes all their external terrorist threats all in one gulp.
Thank you for that, Mark, and thank you very much for joining us. We'll just put this, it seems to have gone. I had an image there just to pop on screen, but it basically said that they're saying, who is going to replace Cameron? Where did that image go? There we are. Who is going to replace Cameron? And we say, well, let's start replacing the whole of Westminster, because this is the only way we're going to get the country back. Last 2 seconds from you, Patrick.
Nothing particular. I just want to say that I'm really encouraged to see that the conversation around the Brexit vote is getting a little more deeper and a little more intelligent across the board, even in some parts of the mainstream media as well as the alternative, so-called alternative media. So that's very encouraging, and I think people are getting more intelligent, a little wiser to the ways of how they're being manipulated by the political class.
Brilliant. And let's remember that 17 million people just about voted leave. So if we want to engage those 17 million people, the best place to start is exactly as Patrick said, by talking about the European Union. Let's get out the truth about where the European Union came from. It has the constitution of a dictatorship and the laws of a police state. That's it from UK Column News. Thank you for joining us. If you like what we do, please consider taking out a subscription or making a donation. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.